Hello again, and welcome back to another Star Citizen Did You Know? Did you know that humans were not the only ones with a long and violent history? Much like us, the species called Xi'an have a long timeline of conflict spanning as far back as 20,000 BCE. We will be going over some of their history today as well as their biology, but first, what are the Xi'an and why is their history so amazing? The Xi'an are a bipedal reptilian-like race that can stand anywhere from 5 to 7 feet tall, similar in structure to humans. The Xi'an have one set of legs and arms, with the exception of their hands only having 4 fingers per hand, unlike our own. They tend to be very religious as well, yet they do not believe in a higher power. This religion, named Litova, is a moral and spiritual belief which guides its adherents' view of the universe. The teachings of which roughly translate to, the greater the thought, the greater the action, which encourages thinking before any action is taken. Now, the saying also has a bit of humor to it when looked at it from another species' point of view, because the Xi'an are known to live extremely long lives, sometimes spanning hundreds of years in our time. It's only fair that they like to think and plan for a couple of decades before acting on any major decision. Since they are also exothermic, they can consciously control their metabolic system rates to slow down in the case of preservation, or speed it up to reach a heightened state of euphoria that aids them in the appreciation of artwork. Carrion, also known as decaying flesh, formed an important part of the diet in prehistoric Xi'an, and as such led to reliance on forms of food prep down the road. Rather than cooking, fermentation and decay has been the choice of preparation for as long as they have been around. It is also documented that in their prehistoric days, they were not the apex predator of their ecosystem, which shows in their psychology and evolution. Despite all that, the Xi'an are a very calculating and peaceful race when compared to other dangers of the universe. However, this was not always the case. The Great Divide, often referred to as the Xi'an Civil War, was a series of military engagements which ended in the eradication of the Xi'an homeworld's atmosphere, causing the death of millions. To explain this better, first we must understand why this happened. The Xi'an politics were structured as houses called Yayua, which are made up of members of a single family. These houses served the functions of states and corporations within the framework of the Xi'an government, each one being allowed to serve one function deemed vital to the mutual prosperity of the Xi'an Empire. At the time, there were 4 major houses, being House Klo, House Ui, House Rua, and House Qi. The houses are typically very strict in terms of their members, bringing us to the reason the conflict had begun in the first place. In the year of 20,044 BCE Standard Earth years, the last daughter of the House Klo attempted to defect to the House Ui, causing extreme conflict between the two houses. As the hostilities worsened, the Houses Qi and Rua were compelled to join a now system-wide civil war. This came to a crowning point in the conflict when the House of Ui sabotaged the weather satellites surrounding Hayoten 3, intending to assassinate the leaders of the other 3 houses during a tentative peace talk. Unfortunately, this assassination ended in a horrible chain reaction which led to the destruction of Hayoten 3's atmosphere, killing all who could not escape in time. Survivors of this incident fled to the nearby colony world of Kawa, also known as Hayoten 4, which would later become their new capital. Following the incident, the Xi'an decided to reassess their culture, coming together for the first time in 289 years to form the Xi'an Empire, in which the surviving daughter of House Rua was voted into power and named the first emperor in the year 19,770 BCE. This was done so as compensation, as her house had suffered near annihilation during the incident. Only a mere 13 years later, House Qi decided that this was not in their interest and attempted to seize power from the imperial house. After a brief set of skirmishes, the coup ended in complete failure as the remaining 3 houses quickly overcame the House Qi. For their betrayal, they were sentenced to complete extermination. For many Xi'an, this was seen as a final event of the Great Divide era, and thus beginning the First Imperial Age. The First Imperial Age was the longest dynasty in Xi'an history to date, spanning almost 15,000 years, or around 19,000 Earth years in comparison. The first major change outside of having a unified ruler for the first time was that the Xi'an calendar reset to 1.0. Well, what does 1.0 mean, you may ask? This new calendar was much like the old one, with the exception being the number 1. The 1 represents what Imperial Age they are currently in, while the number after represents the current year of that age. As years pass by and thrones change houses, the first number will slowly climb higher and higher, each resetting the year to 0 afterwards. For example, if there is a theoretical change of thrones between the houses in the year 1.450, it would reset to 2.0. The second major change came with the religion of Laitova being integrated into common law to push for a more spiritually active empire as a whole. During this new era of peace, the Xi'an discovered jump points within their system for the very first time. With the discovery of stable means to escape their solar system, it was decided that the Xi'an would enact a mandatory service. This new mandatory service was a bureaucratic and military body made up of both male and female Xi'an aged 40 to 70. For almost all individuals, they were placed where they were needed regardless of their preference to military or administrative roles. After service, the most common outcome would be for them to return home to their house of origin, but some elect to stay in service permanently. With a now well-functioning government, the Xi'an set out to terraform their first worlds outside of the system. This was a relatively easy task for them, as the technology had been available to them for roughly 6,000 years before the beginning of the First Imperial Age, when a set of volcanic eruptions forced the then divided houses to pool resources to find a solution. 1,000 years of nothing notable happening passed by until one day Emperor Xi'an of the Rua stepped down, making way for Yahase of the Xiao house, ending the First Imperial Age. The Second Imperial Age was known as the shortest dynasty in Xi'an history, but held a lot of very important events. During this period, the explorers discovered multiple star systems and expanded the borders of the Xi'an Empire. In 291 CE, they achieved first contact with a species known to us as the Karthak. After several decades of strained relations, the worst-case scenario occurs when war breaks out between the two species, being deemed the Spirit Wars in 351 CE, or 2.961 Xi'an. Despite not knowing the exact reason why the war broke out, or not knowing much about what actually happened during the war, we do know that it spanned a total of 991 standard Earth years and had a profound effect on the Xi'an society. In the year of 1225 CE, the emperor of the time, Lith Se Xiao, and all of her house were exterminated due to a bombing incursion by the Kurthak, leaving the empire with no ruler. This was the official entrance into what was known as the Dark Era. Shortly after, chaos was unleashed throughout the Xi'an. Those in a bureaucratic class attempted to keep the government functioning, but struggled to do so without an emperor and a royal family dictating over them. The war effort also took a major blow, having suffered the loss of leadership, as the imperial house controlled the military as directly as it did the government. Rather than thinking rationally and pragmatically, the remaining powerful houses feuded and political factions formed. Some argued that retribution against the Karthak was necessary, while others claimed that peace was needed in this time. Various houses acted unilaterally, with some trying to broker deals as others started to secretly arm themselves. Envoys were sent throughout the systems to every settlement in search of a new ruler, but after years of searching found no matches. After decades of this uncertainty, some Xi'an philosophers pondered whether a new ruler would only appear after the war had ended with the Karthak. Eventually, the public opinion swung in the direction of peace, and a ceasefire was negotiated by the remaining military bureaucrats. Due to the fact that a new emperor could not be found, the remaining powerful houses grew concerned that they might lose everything, causing a very real threat of another brutal civil war. In this time, the dissolution of the empire was a real possibility, only ending after the rise of the House Krei, which was selected as the Third Imperial House in 1457 CE Standard Earth years. A candidate was finally found when the newborn infant Yuio was named emperor, ending the Dark, and with it, the Second Imperial Age. Having been born into leadership, Yuio Sei-Krei eventually ascended to the throne with a quiet confidence and immediately instituted a number of sweeping changes. She strengthened the settlements and the military fortifications in the systems connected to the Kurthok, then immediately banned jump point hunting in those systems. The reason for this was to have as little contact with the Kurthok as possible and ensure that the ceasefire would hold for longer. This decision is what ultimately led them to expand in the direction of humanity, where Xi'an were discovered in 2530 CE Standard Earth years. The Xi'an Empire became known to the humans when the Gaia Planet Services attempted to terraform a planet without the authorization of the United Empire of Earth. Well, it turns out the planet wasn't uninhabited. The terraformers were busy building the equipment when the Xi'an arrived, resulting in the workers being immediately captured by the alien military forces who discovered them. And this began the 259-year Cold War. During the Cold War, humanity was in the darker era of human history in which the government often used the Xi'an threat as a means to terrify their own citizens and swell the power of the military. Although no side declared open war, there were many casualties on both sides from covert operations, sabotage, and espionage. Funnily enough, due to their lifespan, there are many Xi'an from the Cold War era that are still alive, including the current Emperor Tuang Kray, who was crowned in 2643 CE Standard Earth years. Tuang eventually negotiated the Daring Peace Accord with Senator Akari in 2789, finally dissolving the Perry line between the two. Since then, the Xi'an and humanity have had a rough relationship for quite some time, but the relationship was gradually improving leading up to the Human-Xi'an Trade Initiative in 2947 Standard Earth years. This leads us to present day, and while distrust and suspicion are still at hand, it is clear that the future of the two nations is intertwined with one another. This has been Professor Rain with another lesson. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.